Unit 1, from 1491 to 1607. Continuity number 1, European exploration. Europeans went to West in order to find India in order to trade. However, they discovered the Americas. They traveled to different regions and conquered and installed new ideas on the natives. The sense of European nationalism and competition caused the Europeans to start exploring the world. It also helped start a new civilization, which further expanded the sense of nationalism. Continuity number 2, the Comenda system. Spanish system, which was a Spanish system which allowed the government to give land grants or give Indians to certain colonies in return for the promise to try and Christianize. It is important because the Europeans forced the natives to convert to Christianity. As a result, there was a new identity that was created in the natives. Continuity number 3, Spanish caste system, which was a social hierarchy based on how European you were. Wealth, education, and physical appearance helped determine how an individual might be viewed. It included Peninsulars, Creoles, Indios, Negros, Mestizos, and Mulattoes. It was significant because they created a class system which was based on race, made a racial identity prominent because the more Europeans you were, the higher up you would be on the system. Change number 1, Catholic missions. Although the Spanish founded commercial and military centers in the 16th century, another common form of settlement by the early 17th century was the Catholic missions. Missions had commercial lives, but their primary purpose, at least at first, was converting natives to Catholicism. There was usually military garrisons connected to the missions to protect the Europeans from hostile natives, which shows a sense of superiority over the natives. Continuity number 4, the English in Ireland. England's first experience with colonization came out not onto the New World, but in a land separated from Britain's only by a narrow stretch of sea, Ireland. The Irish lived in many ways the English considered crude and wasteful, and they fought back against the intruders with ferocity. English concluded that the Irish could not be assimilated to English society, thus showing a prominent idea of national superiority. Puritan separatists, which determined to worship as they pleased their own independent congregation, but that flew in the face of the English, and which outlawed unauthorized religious meetings, levied taxes to support the church. It is a change due to the fact that the Church of England, as official religion, was now known, which satisfied the Queen Elizabeth, but not the English Christian, which shows a national disunity between the country. Growth of the African slave trade. 16th century, the market for slaves grew dramatically as a result of the rising European demand for sugar grew dramatically as a result of the rising European demand for sugarcane. It is a change because the African Americans are being identified as a form of labor for profit, and thus racial superiority is established. And finally, the Roanoke colonization, which was the next year he secured from Elizabeth a six-year grant similar to Gilbert's and sent a small group of men on an expedition to explore the North American coast. In 1585, Raleigh led a group of men to Roanoke to establish a colony. Thus, Grenville deposited the settlers on the island, remained long enough to antagonize the natives, which shows a sense of national superiority in the European colonies. So Unit 2, tobacco cultivation as a change. John Rawle began to experiment with tobacco since there was demand for it. The demand for tobacco led to the need for labor. As a result, indentured servants were used because they were poor men who could work for 4 to 7 years. It created a new class in the United States, which formed the caste system in the United States. Plymouth as a change. The Pilgrims founded Plymouth when they came over to the United States in order to escape religious persecution in Europe. It was significant because it created a new identity in the U.S. since the Pilgrims were religious. It brought religious ideas over to the U.S. The Great Migration as a continuity. 16,000 Puritans migrated from Europe because they were being religiously persecuted. They were very strict Christians who were separated when the Church of England emerged. It was significant because it led to a spread of Christianity to the new U.S. It also created a new religious identity in the New England colonies because of the introduction of religion. The establishment of Rhode Island as a continuity. Roger Williams, who was banished, founded the Rhode Island colony because he believed in religious toleration and separation of church and government. He also believed that the individuals could have relationships with God. It was important because it created a new identity because it created a social society filled with religious toleration. The beginning of chattel slavery as a change. Chattel slavery was when slaves were being used as property, which made it almost impossible to get rights since they were seen as property instead of people. It created a new racial identity for African Americans because they were being seen as property instead of as people. The Holy Spirit as a change. People of all religions came together, religious toleration, friendly relations with the natives, and no slavery. It was an ideal society in the eyes of William Penn. It was important because it strengthened the idea of nationalism and patriotism because it went against the British ideas of government. It also created a regional identity because this region was distinct from the other region because of its toleration. Middle Passes as a continuity. It was a stage of triangle trade in which millions of Africans were shipped to the New World as part of the triangle trade over the Atlantic. It was significant because of the Europeans were dehumanizing the slaves, and the slaves were given an identity that made them no longer a person. Slave codes as a continuity. One factor to determine whether a person was subject to slave codes was color. In contrast to colonial societies of Spanish America, where people of mixed race had a different status than pure Africans, English recognized no distinctions, and thus establishing a racial superiority.
Unit 3, 1754 to the 1800s. Continuity number 1, the Enlightenment era, 1685 to 1815. A continuity that can be seen within national identity is the Enlightenment era, as it was important because a strong sense of nationalism in the colonies, which later led to the colonies declaring independence from England. Change number 1, American Revolution, 1775. A change that can be seen within national identity is the American Revolution in 1775, as it was a war between the British and the colonies, and it was important because the colonies united as one force, except the loyalists, and was created a sense of nationalism as well to defeat the British, creating a change within the sense of colonies finally being independent. Change number 2, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, 1776. A change that can be seen with the national identity is the Thomas Paine's Common Sense, as it advocated independence from American colonies, Britain, and is considered one of the most influential pamphlets in American history, bringing change towards a sense of transforming a colonial disagreement squabble into the American Revolution. Continuity 2, Declaration of Independence, 1776. A continuity that can be seen within national identity is the Declaration of Independence of 1776, as even though the colonies had independence from Britain, and African Americans, American Indians, and women continued to experience inequality in the sense of unjust fairness towards all race and gender. Continuity 3, Three-Fifth Compromise, 1787. A continuity that can be seen within national identity is the Three-Fifth Compromise. In 1787, African Americans still was continued to be treated horribly and unfairly as they were still belittled and looked down upon. Change number 3, Republican Motherhood. A change that can be seen within national identity is the Republican Motherhood in 1790. As a 20th century term for an attitude toward women's roles present in emerging U.S. states before, during, and after the American Revolution, created a new role for women to play, which was to educate, so that her children can grow and become good U.S. citizens. Continuity number 4, individualism. The continuity that can be seen within national identity is the continuation of the colonies still being distinct from the British power, as they were left to survive and grow by themselves, and the colonies individually developed separately from the British power. Change number 4, autocracy turning to democracy, Articles of Confederation. A change that can be seen within national identity is the change from being an autocracy towards a democracy, as the Articles of Confederation explains the new government of the U.S. The mentality of the people changed from being an autocracy to the first democratic power since the Greeks. Unit number 4, 1800s to 1848. Change number 1, Missouri Compromise, 1820. A change that can be seen within national identity is the Missouri Compromise in 1820, as it led to the Missouri being admitted as a slave state. States north would be as free states, and states south would be admitted as slave states. Created 2 distinct regional identities since the U.S. split into the north and south. Continuity number 1, Abolition Movement, 1830. A continuity that can be seen within national identity is the Abolition Movement in the 1830s, as the continuation of abolition of slavery as it continued to decrease slavery in the South, but still had racial profiling towards African Americans. Change number 2, Second Great Awakening, 1820s. A change that can be seen within national identity is the Second Great Awakening in the 1820s, as it was the Protestant religious revival movement that created a new identity in the U.S. because new branches of Christianity were being formed. Continuity number 2, Seneca Falls Convention, 1848. A continuity that can be seen within national identity is the Seneca Falls Convention, 1848, as the convention was mostly a continuation of the temperance movement and was already the first time women took. Number 3, Transcendentalism, 1820. A change that can be seen within national identity is the Transcendentalism in the 1820s, as well as it encouraged the self-reliant and think more independently. Also emphasized the observance of nature, truth, life, and the universe, led to a new identity because of the new groups of people that spurred from this movement. Continuity number 3, Louisiana Purchase. Continuity that can be seen within national identity is the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. As the colonies continued to the expansion after independence and later completely was able to expand territory after Louisiana Purchase. Change number 4, Temperance Movement, 1830. A change that can be seen within national identity is the temperance movement in the 1830s, as it was a movement against the consumption of alcohol beverages. It was important because it was one of the first times women took the lead role in the movement. Continuity number 4, the Indian Remove Act. Continuity that can be seen within national identity in India is the Indian Remove Act in the 1830s, as it was a continuation in the mistreatment of Indians and kicking out Indians, quote-unquote, from federal territory. The colonies kept a superior mindset over the Native Americans.
So to start off with Unit 5, that goes from 1844 to 1877. Some continuities and some changes are from, the first continuity is the expansion in foreign policy. So it allowed for the integration of a multitude of cultures, and the evidence for this is Manifest Destiny. You see, Manifest Destiny, we see that the Americans continue their foreign policy in expanding, which through Manifest Destiny they attempted to justify their expansion to the West. Our second continuity is racial supremacy. Americans continue their belief that the average white male is superior to others, and this clearly affected their national identity because they continue to have this sort of, where they were sided with this sort of like superiority that then through the Jim Crow laws attempted to exert upon the African Americans. So our third continuity is with the election of 1864. The re-election of Abraham Lincoln showed that the Americans continued their devotion to the Republican ideals and identified with that party. So this clearly affected their national identity because they continued to reside themselves with these like ideals, which through their political party attempted to like get these through Congress and instill reform. So our fourth continuity is the agricultural economy. White workers continued in almost every area of the Western economy. They occupied all tiers of management, and this continued throughout history. So they show that that white workers continue their superiority on the top of organizations, which ultimately continue this kind of perception in their national identity that they're superior to other races. So to start off with the changes, our first change is the loss in a strong national identity, and this is primarily because of the differences amongst regional lines that ultimately led to the secession of southern states. And so we see this in the Civil War, in which clearly with like the opposing ideas of the South and the North, it preemptively led to like this civil war ultimately inside of the nation that was just basically like these ideas manifesting to like a greater problem that ultimately led to war. So our second change is Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is a description of treatment in the South. And for the first time, it led to like a humanization of blacks, which being written by an abolitionist to challenge the ideas that slavery was good for the slaves. So before whites used like the justification for slavery, saying that like it was good for African Americans to be a part of slavery because they didn't really know how to like be part of society otherwise. And so for the first time in Uncle Tom's Cabin, we see an abolitionist like advocating against this, and rather saying that like African Americans do have like a place in society and shouldn't be just like confined to slavery. So our third change is the Emancipation Proclamation, which was the expansion of anti-slavery actions made Northerners truly view themselves as a nation of free men. So this clearly affected the national identity of Americans because they began to see themselves as a nation of free men rather than like that in which like humans would be in the slavery that they were. So our fourth change is the 14th Amendment, which allowed for equal protection of the laws and addressed citizenship rights. So for the first time, we see that Americans are actually qualifying the necessities for someone to be considered a citizen of the United States, and we actually see that this like gets passed along to even African Americans. That didn't happen before, which primarily resulted from the Civil War. So now to move on to Unit 6, which in regards to our periodization shift runs from 1877 to 1898. So our first continuity is the Dawes Act of 1887, which authorized the federal government to break up tribal lands by partitioning them into individual plots, a continuity in the U.S. government taking Indian land. So clearly what we see here is that the U.S. government is continuing this, like their attempts to remove the Indians from their territories, even though they continuously make these promises that they won't touch the reserved land for them. However, they continuously do. So another continuity that we see is the Spanish-American War of 1898, in which the Americans are continuing their desires of manifest destiny and expanding the U.S. And so in doing so, this continues their conception in American national identity that they're superior, which is what they use to justify this expansion. So our third continuity is the Populist Party, which it derived from the Farmers Alliance and the Grange that came from the previous time period, which is why it's a continuity. And not only that, but the party was an agrarian-based political movement aimed at improving conditions for country's farmers and agrarian workers. So doing this, it affected American national identity because they began to individualize themselves based on their parties and considering themselves part of this party that ultimately had these goals in mind. So our fourth continuity was social Darwinism in the Gilded Age, which embraced laissez-faire capitalism and racism. They believed that government should not interfere in the survival of the fittest by helping the poor, and promote the idea that some races are biologically superior. And this further the belief that there's an objective inferiority within races, which also reflects like the continuities from previous time period as we saw like within American national identity. So now to go to the changes, our first change was with the Knights of Labor, which is when Americans began to unionize and individualize themselves based on their labor status. Our second change is the Great Migration, which is at the end of the Civil War. Over 20 million African Americans left the South to the North, affecting American identity by making it more ethnically diverse, introducing a large amount of blacks into the North. Our third change is the Gold Rush, which increased migration to the West and entrepreneurism within that area and helped define Americans in their quest to seek greater wealth. Our fourth change is the increased nativist sentiment, which in response to the increased immigration to the United States within that time period of Chinese and Mexican American descent, it helped refine American identity where language...
1890 to 1945. Continuity, American exceptionalism. Americans continue to believe that their country was unique, which is something that we've carried over since almost the days of the founders, when we were the first modern democracy since the Greeks and the first full democracy, unlike the constitutional monarchies of Europe at the day. And this belief continued throughout this time period, as it has basically the whole time. Another continuity is the westward expansion and growth of statehood via manifest destiny. During this time, 6 new states were added: Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona. This continued the long-standing American tradition that has been going on since the founding of the country, an important part of the American identity, as we constantly believed in the new frontier. Another continuity is the discrimination of blacks and beliefs of white supremacy, specifically the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling upheld the doctrine of separate but equal, which was the foundation for discrimination until the 1960s with the repealing of it in Brown versus Board of Education. Another change was isolationism to world police that we saw from 1890 to 1945. This is exemplified by Americans' extreme reluctance to get into both World Wars I and II, and the belief that we should look at ourselves. But after the war, and during the war, we viewed ourselves as really the saviors of the world, which involved nation building, nukes, and overall global domination in trade and all other aspects. Another change is the Great Migration, which continued during this time period, and saw the migration of millions of African Americans going from the South to the North, and really changed the racial demographics of America to this day. And another change is the urbanization of America. This is a really big shift because since Jefferson and the Jeffersonian idea of a nation of farmers, we believed that one of the most important American values was the ability to have your own land and your own spacious plot, and that, really living in cities was a bad thing. But nowadays, we were getting to the point where over half of people were living in cities, and so this really changed the American cultural belief from a nation of farmers to a nation of urbanites. 1945 to 1980. Continuity is the active role in the world that we inherited from the last unit, specifically with regards to the way we viewed ourselves as a world police. And this is evidenced by the containment policy that America held with regards to the Koreas, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. Another continuity is the strong Christian beliefs, which we see during this time. We really see rising towards the tail end of this time. But throughout American history, there's always been a strong Christian majority in this country. Another continuity is feminism. In this case, we see second wave feminism, which resulted from the feminist mystique, but it's really a continuity of the first wave, which we saw in the 1920s with the suffragettes. Another continuity, advancing technology. Throughout this time, especially during the war, there was massive leaps and bounds forward in technology, and during this time, there's no different. We're seen as the technological leader, and that really affects our culture, from everything, the advancement of computers, and really the start of personal computers at the end of this, to the moon landing. There's a big change, and it was from a reluctant ally of the USSR to a brutal enemy. During World War II, America and the Soviet Union were allies against a common enemy, Germany and Japan. But this massively changed during this time period, and it really defined this time period with the Cold War. Another change is the growth of government. From 1945 to 1980, the government continued on its trajectory set under the New Deal, and really changed the way that America viewed its government further, especially with Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, where we saw massive anti-poverty programs, even during a time of relative economic stability. There's the end of segregation with Brown versus Board of Education, which overturned Plessy versus Ferguson's ruling of separate but equal. This doctrine really is what gave us our modern egalitarian society. It banned the segregation of schools and, by extension, the belief of separate but equal. Another change is the end of the expansion of America and Manifest Destiny. This occurred with the last state being added to the Union of Hawaii on August 21st of 1959. This is a significant change because for the longest time, again, another Jeffersonian idea, America was a nation that continuously expanded and moved westward. But America ran out of territory to manifest, which really brings us to Unit 9 from 1980 to the present day. There's a major continuity, which is the expansion of rights for marginalized groups, specifically the Stonewall Rebellion and the gay rights movement, which is a continuation of a long-standing tradition of America expanding its rights from suffragettes to the civil rights era. It's just the extension of that. Another continuity is the belief of American exceptionalism. And this really occurred under Reagan, where he portrayed America as this big macho country who would not take anything from anyone, and really America as a shining city upon the hill, which goes all the way back to the Quakers. Another continuity is the rollback of gender roles, which is continuing from the hippies and yippies of the 1960s. And during this time, women continued to go more and more into the workforce, and more families became dual income households. Another continuity is the increasing representation of blacks, which continues over from the civil rights era, which is exemplified by Barack Obama being elected to the presidency in 2008 and again in 2012, which shows that America has been continuing to increase the power and the representation of blacks in our country since Martin Luther King and the civil rights era. A big change is Reaganomics. In this, we see the biggest tax cuts ever, other than those that took place after the end of World War I, where the top marginal tax rate went from 90 down to 28%. This is a huge deal, especially for the rich in America, and was part of his supply-side economics belief, which believed that if you cut taxes for the rich, they would use that money to invest and grow the economy as a whole. Another big change is America's role during this time period as the only superpower. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, America was really left as the only major player in the whole world, and this gave America unprecedented power to exercise its will, which is really where we see some of the changes with the beginning of the attack on privacy that we've seen up until this day is a big change with the Patriot Act after 9/11. This really changed the way that America is identified, with the fact that they now viewed their government, especially after the Snowden leaks, as more of a creepy factor. Last change is the war on terror. During this, America changed from stopping bad ideas from spreading to crushing them where they stand, specifically with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, in which America responded to 9/11 and the alleged threat of WMDs by actively invading and overthrowing the ruling government of these countries and trying to install American governments. This is a change even from America's policy in Latin America, where historically America has involved itself in regime change, but only by supporting groups that were already advocating for it, rather than going in and doing it themselves.